I'm glad one of us noticed that we weren't live because we would have just done the whole show.
Okay. People in here. I'm like, I'm talking. We've been talking for a good at least 5 minutes. I said, oh, people. And I look over and see, go live. I'm like, oh, damn. Holy moly, we ain't even live. Ain't that right there, girl? What you doing?
This is why we can't get anything done ever. This is why we'd be up at 6 o'clock in the morning. Okay, it's time to go to sleep.
And next thing you know, somebody has to say something or do something. And that's another whole 3 hours.
Oh, God.
It'd be like, okay, the sun is up, the bird is chirping, the kids are out playing. I think it's time to go to sleep. Yep. Then somebody do something or say something. And then I said, you know what? At this point, it's lunchtime. Let's just get over.
Yeah, we might as well just try again later. Try again tonight. I have to say though, those times really helped me through just laughing and all of that, the stuff, the talks that we would have until, 6, 7 in the morning really helped me a lot.
Right.
And
before we go any further, let me introduce, this is a special guest and a very special family member of mine. This is my baby sissy, Candace.
Hi.
Hi, everybody. Hi, peoples. Yeah, and going through a tough time, when you were going through it, it made me happy to know that I was able to help you and be there for you.
That was, so what year did we meet? It would have been 2002, 3.
2000, yeah, it was after.
It was 2003. 9/11. Yeah, it was 2003 because I was turning 17.
Yeah,
and I had, because I had just moved. I had just ran away with my ex-husband and moved up to Washington. And we moved into the Sun Hill Apartments in Parkland. And if you know, you know. That's all I got to say about. And if you're wondering about that a wonderful establishment, it's been featured several times on this wonderful show called Cops. Pierce County. And
all because of one person.
Not saying any names, Pam. But I moved up there and I was 17 and dumb and in love, and also suffering from bipolar disorder. Uh-huh. And at the time, I didn't realize that I also was suffering from PTSD.
Right.
And it turned out that my relationship was an abusive one. And, I would go days without eating. And not because of my mental health, but just because we didn't have anything in the house. We didn't have any food. We didn't have, I didn't have a phone to call my mom. It was very isolating. And then the day I moved in, you walked up to me and you said, "Hey girl, how are you? I'm Lisa. If you ever need anything, I'm right over here. And we're going to do a little barbecue tonight." Or, everybody would hang out. And I was like, "Oh, that's really nice." And I didn't realize that would turn into a 20-year sisterhood. And that's something I really want to talk about too, is support systems. If it wasn't for you at that time in my life, I don't know that I would have survived. You made sure that I was safe. You made sure that I was eating. You made sure that if I ever needed anybody, you took me to the hospital. You made me laugh harder than I have ever laughed in my entire life. And, you didn't have to. I mean, here I was, this broken kid who thought she was invincible and then realized that she wasn't real quick, and you were there to kind of pick up the pieces. There's a lot more to it, but I know that at that time in my life, when I really needed somebody, you were there, and you've always been there. So I want to say thank you for that.
I will always be there.
I know that, and I will too. And that's why you're my sister. I feel like
Exactly.
I feel like you have blood family, and then you have chosen family. And I'm very grateful to be your chosen family.
Me too. I mean, I was the youngest. Now you the youngest.
And I've always been the youngest, so I got all the perks, like sitting in the back seat always when we went everywhere. Just random things, little sisters. I had a very hard time growing up with my sisters, because of my mental health. And I know that we kind of wanted to talk about a couple things. So should I just
go for it?
Okay. So I am 36 years old now. When I was 10 years old, I was diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder. For you, those of you who may not know what bipolar 1 is, or bipolar in general, it is a chemical imbalance in the brain. So essentially, we have things called neurotransmitters in our brain that regulate your emotions. And what happens is, in a normally, or whatever you say, normal functioning brain, those chemicals help with your reactions to things, right? Mm-hmm. So if somebody is, let's say, something happens, and how do I put this? All right, let's say something good happens. Let's say you're walking down the street and you find a $10 bill. Well, a normal person's going to be happy and just, oh yeah, that's great. But you might have a reaction of, oh my gosh, this is the best thing that's ever happened in my life. Mm-hmm. Or if something, let's say something sad happens or something bad happens, and somebody's normal reaction would be like, wow, that was messed up. I'm not trying to deal with that. You have an extreme reaction. So you're super angry, or you're super frustrated, or it also regulates your moods just day to day. So what happens is, you have times, and I'm probably not explaining this very well, because technically, because I'm not, obviously, right. I'm not a doctor, but so basically, they used to call it manic depressive. And the reason for that is because with bipolar 1, there's bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. Bipolar 1, typically you have more manic episodes, mm-hmm. that last longer. And then, and basically with a manic episode, it's kind of the only way that I've been able to ever describe it is like you have no need for sleep. You can just keep going and going and going and going.
It's like taking a shot of straight caffeine.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's like you're up here and you're like, wow, I'm invincible. I could walk in front of a speeding train and I could be like Superman and stop that train because and you don't feel the need to sleep. So you're running on just you're way up here. It's like you have a shot of adrenaline going. And that can last from anywhere from 10 hours to 3 weeks. And the problem is in those times, because you're not sleeping and and it's not that you don't, like a normal person would go, okay, I need to go and lay down and go to sleep. Even if I'm not super tired, it's 10 o'clock. I got to get up in the morning. When you're manic, your brain doesn't work that way. So you start to get this sort of foggy, sleep deprived situation. So I've never personally done meth, but I've known a lot of tweakers in my life, and I would equate it almost to that, where you're so sleep deprived and so you start to get that paranoia, you start to get the anxiety, you start to make really bad decisions because you end up not having impulse control.
Right.
So, because also the neurotransmitters in your brain control your impulses. So, for instance, it's a long story that I'm not going to get into, but when I was a kid, I decided I was at my dad's for like a birthday or something. And I decided that I didn't want to go home to my mom's because I was in trouble for something. To this day, don't even know what I was in trouble for. But I got on my dad lived in Salt Lake, my mom lived in Vegas, and I was very manic. And my dad put me on the plane, and that was back when they could walk you to the gate. So he puts me on the plane. I wait for him. I give it about 5-10 minutes because I flew quite often back and forth, so I knew about how long before they would close the doors and all that. Mm-hmm. So I waited for about 10 minutes to make sure he wasn't in the terminal, and I just got up and walked off the plane. I was like, no, I'm not going home. It's 15. You do things like that where you're not thinking, you just do it. And then it's like, oh, I guess I shouldn't have, done that. It wasn't the safest choice and it wasn't the best choice, but I just did it. So you really don't think about the consequences either. And then what happens is you go up and up and up. It's like a roller coaster, and you hit that peak, and then you crash really hard. And that's where the depressive comes in. It's a depression. It's a sadness and a depression and an emptiness that I can't even explain. Mm-hmm. You go from invincible to shattered. Mm-hmm. And it can happen gradually. It can happen gradually, so maybe like a day or two, or it can just snap of a fingers. You could be, and it's really hard because it's very unpredictable. And generally by the time you realize that your pattern has started, it's too late to stop it.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, there is a stigma with bipolar disorder. Well, with mental health in general, there is a stigma about it being not a real thing. I've been told that it's an excuse for bad behavior. I've been told that you're just crazy, which is my trigger word. If someone calls me crazy, they call me a bitch, they call me whatever else. Personally, it doesn't bother me, because your opinion doesn't really. But if you call me crazy, there's the issue. And you have times where during the behavior, whatever the behavior is, whether you're having an extreme meltdown and you're screaming and you're angry and you're, because you go from those extremes. One minute you're happy, the next you're angry, the next you're, internally, I would be telling myself, you need to calm down. But physically I couldn't. And it's bipolar disorder is a physical as much as it is mental. It's literally a chemical imbalance in your brain. So it's no different than, at least in my opinion, than somebody who has diabetes and needs the insulin. Your insulin's not working the way that it. So, it's pretty difficult to get a diagnosis, especially in children. I know that my mom had to fight to get me a diagnosis, because I was just out of control. I was, I would lose my. Oh, go ahead.
There's a lot of doctors that don't like to diagnose children, and I get it, because being a child, you can't really, you don't know if this is the kid or if this is something mental. So I know a lot of doctors don't like to diagnose
Well,
but sometimes you have to.
Well, right, and that's the thing, is that because they would tell my mom she's just a brat. She needs more discipline. She's spoiled. All of which were true, by the way. But I would do, like, I would lose my shit over nothing. I got so mad, and I would throw things when I was mad. I knocked my sister out with a high heel. I knocked her out with a remote control, like throwing them at her. I would get these bursts of just anger and frustration and depression, and my mom would literally be crying with these doctors, going, something is like wrong with her, and they would go, she's just going through, it's just a kid thing, that their hormones are, now she's starting puberty, and or it's early, but and my mom was like begging these doctors and going, please, I'm begging. And it wasn't just one or two or three doctors. I literally got kicked out of a study for children with mental health issues. This is how bad it is that they don't listen. I was in preschool, or preschool age, and University of Utah was doing a study on children with behavioral issues and mental health issues. And I had to have been probably 5, 6 years old, maybe not even that old. And I was always the small one. I was always the one that was way smaller than everybody else in my class. So I was the only one that would fit in the baby carriage. And they always wanted me to be the baby when we played games. And I was like, I don't want to do that. Like, I don't want to be the baby anymore. And the teacher picked me up and tried to like force me into the stroller or whatever it was. And I spun around and bit her on the butt. And now I was wrong for doing that. And I had been just out of control before that. But my mom did come down and defend me and go, hey, you don't ever force my child to be in a baby carriage, or, no, she shouldn't have bit you, and no, she shouldn't have done. But they kicked me out of the study. That's how bad it is when you're literally in a study learning about children with behavioral issues, and they just don't want to deal with it, and they kick a kid out.
Right.
So it was years of my mom, of counseling, and my mom begging and going, and they finally diagnosed me at 10. And it's something that I live with every day of my life.
Right.
Going back to people who say that it's an excuse for bad behavior. There are many things that I would not have done had I been clear-headed and not manic.
Right.
With that said, I still take 100% responsibility for everything that I have done, regardless of my mental state.
Right.
When I'm sorry if I'm rambling. It's just there's a lot there's a lot to this, because people need to start listening.
Yes.
See, I was very lucky. I had a very good support system from the time I was, because I always had my mom and my sisters, and as I got older, I had you and my husband, and and then I had some things that made it even worse. I had a birth father who was a sociopath, and that didn't help. But I always had someone who had my back.
Right.
And not everybody has that. So when people say it's not a real thing, I wouldn't be alive today if it weren't for the people in my life.
Right.
Because seriously, I look back at a lot of things that I did and went, wow, I should not have survived that. Or the times of deep depression where I was actively suicidal, and then, people say, also I've heard people say, just get over it. Or just go to sleep. Or, it is what it is. You'll be fine. And it's a struggle every day. It's a struggle. I have to fight for my mental health. I had a manic episode of, actually, it's almost a year. It'll be a year and a couple days from now. I had, actually, what's the date? So tomorrow, it'll be a year tomorrow. I had the worst manic episode that I have had in over 10 years. Because I've been stable on my meds since 2008. And, they need to be adjusted now and again and things like that. And they hadn't been adjusted. And, I would like to say I personally am an advocate for antidepressant, antipsychotic medications, because without them, I would not be able to have a functioning normal life. However, because it's a chemical imbalance in your brain,
right,
it's very tricky to find a combination of medication that works. And then when you do, you constantly have to have the doses adjusted and different things like that, because your body, especially because it's chemical imbalance, your body absorbs it differently. And so then it stops working over a period of time. And so I had been bounced around from doctor to doctor to doctor to doctor, because I had a really good therapist for 6 years, and then she retired, and then I was stuck with residents that were only doing med management through UW, and then they stopped seeing long-term patients. So I had to do that whole process over again of finding, and so I didn't have talk therapy at the time, and there had been a lot going on. And, life stress definitely plays a big role in it as well. And I'm not going to go into details, but there were a lot of stressors. And I ended up not, I couldn't get a hold of anybody. I kept telling them for like a month up to this point that my meds need to be adjusted. I know my patterns. I know what's happening. I know that I'm not okay and I need to get in. And I couldn't get a hold of anybody. I couldn't get in anywhere. They would tell me to go to the ER. I'm like, it's not that simple. I ended up not sleeping for almost 9 days, 8.5 days. I made some really bad, life-altering decisions in that state of mania that fortunately I've been able to put behind me and move forward from, for the most part. But something I never thought ever would be even in my realm of reality. I didn't hurt anybody or anything. It was just a stupid, but I ended up calling my doctor that I could get a hold of anybody. I said to my husband, I'm not okay. And he wasn't really paying attention. And I kept saying, I'm not okay. But the longer it went, the less I had the capacity to say I'm not okay. Because when you're manic, you feel okay.
Mm-hmm.
When you're manic,
normal.
even though you're not, in the beginning you can feel it and say, okay, I'm starting to feel manic. I'm not okay. But then when you peak and you feel fine, you feel great, you feel invincible.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you start to crash, then you start to feel it. It's, oh God, I'm not okay. I'm not okay. I'm not okay. And there's a timeline in there where you have this like sort of window of opportunity to be able to say, I need help. And that goes away very quickly. So I couldn't get a hold of my doctors. They said, go to the ER. I went to, I had done that in the past in a similar situation when I was manic, and they said, go to the ER. And I sat in the ER for 7 hours before anybody even came in the room. And by that point, if my husband hadn't been there to say, no, you need to stay and get some help, I would have left. Because I walked in there saying I'm actively suicidal and I need help. And and then you sit there for 6 hours in a tiny room that gives you even more anxiety. Or in a waiting room with other people, right? So, because they don't see it as a medical emergency the same way they see it as a heart attack is a medical emergency, but it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to, and yep, I'm going to call them out. I went to Smoky Point Behavioral Health
Mm-hmm.
here in Smoky Point, Washington, where I live. And I walked in, and obviously there's COVID, so you have your mask whenever. And I said, I'm not okay. And I told them everything that had happened. And I told them how manic I had been and how I need help now, because I know that I'm not going to be able to ask for help tomorrow. So I went in there with Matt and I told them everything. Matt's my husband. I told them everything, start to finish. My whole, I mean, from day one, not just from this past manic episode, but from, so that they would understand that I understand my pattern and I know what's going on. And because I said, in retrospect, I should have said I'm actively suicidal, but I'm a firm believer that you have to be 100% honest with your medical
Mm-hmm.
um, caretakers, your doctors, your nurses, because they can't help you if you're not being honest.
Right. Right.
So I honestly said, I'm in this moment not actively suicidal, but I'm getting there. And once I get to that point, logically right now, I can sit here talking to you, Lisa, and go, that's the worst possible thing to ever do. I would never do that to my mom. I would never do that
Right.
to my family. I would never do that to my son. I wouldn't, but when you're in that moment, you don't have the logic and the capacity to say, that's not a good idea.
Right.
So I went in there literally on my hands and knees. Matt carried me. I couldn't walk. I was so exhausted, and at that point I still hadn't slept.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I just, please help me. And they turned me away. They said, if when you become actively suicidal, come back.
See, and that's bullshit because then at that point it's too late, you know. And then y'all want to be like, well, we didn't know. Bullshit, you didn't know. I came in and told you 2 weeks ago that I had an issue, that
Yep.
we was getting to a critical point, and you said until something happens, you can't do a damn thing about it. But by
Right.
then it's too late.
Well, and this is something I really want to bring up too. I mean, outside of bipolar, I just want to make it very clear that it does not make you crazy.
Nope.
It does not. It's not. Doesn't mean that you're a bad person or that it means that you have a mental health issue, and you can be diagnosed. You can go in. They have questionnaires that you can take, that and you can, and testing and stuff like that. So I do encourage people to do that.
Now, being in case in point, being in that illustrious 5-star apartment building that we lived in called Sun Hill, you know, I mean, luscious,
If you know it, you know it. If you don't know, avoid it.
right? I now you know because you was there because I had a neighbor that lived next door to me,
Hmm.
and this man, I mean, I mean,
He
he had
was he was
you knew he had
insanely crazy.
you knew he had mental health issues. But the
100%.
problem was you had a mental health issue with me. And
Yeah.
I ain't done nothing to you. So it's like one day he would say, you know, he would get mad at me because I was talking at him or talking bad about him or acting crazy. And the next day he apologized with a watermelon. Man, I
Yeah,
couldn't
that was
I couldn't eat watermelon for like 2 years after that.
and he literally, by the way, left it on her doorstep.
Yes.
Like a water,
Yes.
just like, sorry, here's a watermelon.
Yes. Well, here's the crux of it, because I think this was the breaking point, because I think it was me, you, and somebody else, and we were sitting on the other side of our illustrious 5-star apartment building. And I guess his
I think
son,
Nancy was with us or something.
somebody, I know there was 3 of us, and his son went by, and nobody, honestly, nobody even paid attention to this
We
child.
didn't even notice that he was there. Like we
We
were
didn't
all
notice,
doing our own thing.
right? And then the next thing you know, here we go. So I had to have a meeting with the manager and the assistant manager and him, because this is, I can see it is escalating, you know. And we were talking, we were good at first, the first 5 minutes, we were good. 6 minutes, it took a left in Albuquerque and New Mexico, and because he started talking about aliens zapping him from the floor and aluminum foil, and the 3 of us, we just all looked at each other like.
And I'd like to point out that he thought we had a taser and were tasing him through the floor because he was on
Yep.
the bottom apartment. At first it was funny because it was like, okay, this dude's, and then it took a very scary turn.
It did, and this is where Pierce County sheriffs was involved, because something happened, and they were called to his apartment, and people were outside watching. As at first, the cops confiscated a couple of rifles out of his apartment, you know. In the end, to give it back, my issue was with, what if this man knock on my door saying I said something, and I open the door and he
Well,
blows
because he
the door.
had threatened, that was part of like when we went to go talk to the manager and when we went and talked to Larry and stuff, it was about the fact it wasn't just like the crazy remarks anymore. It
No.
was the threats of, I know you're out to get me and I'm going to get you. I know you're, and we had said when the police officers were there, and I don't even remember why they showed up. We didn't call them, but
Something was going on.
Something was going on, and they came to his apartment, and had earlier in the day he had said like, you're trying to tase me through the wall, and you're like, this dude was having a psychotic break, okay, and he goes, I'm gonna get you. You just
And
wait.
he was a
I'm gonna
veteran.
get you. And I don't know if he had PTSD or what was going on. But when they removed those guns, we thought, this is great. They went in, they're taking care of it. Nobody's gonna, no way he's not going to at least the, a 72 hour something.
Right.
They didn't even they didn't even like take his fingerprint. They didn't do nothing. They literally handed him his guns back after we told the police, just so you know, he's making threats that he's going to do something. And what did they say?
Basically what you said. We can't do nothing until it happens.
Call me when something happens. So by that point, see, this is my problem, okay? Because I've been on both ends of needing help. Meaning that like I've had my family stand up for me and go, yo, I really need help. And I've gone in and said, I really need help. And I've also had, people who I love very much that have needed help and have desperately needed help and have gone in and said, please help us. This person is not okay. They're having, all of these issues, and we want to do whatever we can to help them. And they literally go, sorry, call us when something happens. Well, here's the problem with that. Now, and I know this is going to be a sensitive topic because of what just happened and the parents buying the gun for the kid that just shot up his school and all of that. I am absolutely 100%. I believe they are absolutely responsible and should be in jail.
Mm-hmm.
With that said, given what my mom went through with me and what I've, seen other people go through in their lives, okay, and been through, when there are a lot of parents, because everybody wants to blame the parents in these 99% of the time they're blaming the parents. The problem is there are a lot of parents and a lot of family members and a lot of people who are actively seeing a problem escalate and escalate and escalate. And they're going in and going, this is a problem. Whether it's that they're worried about this person harming somebody else or self-harm or whatever it is that they're going in and saying, this is a problem, and I'm trying to get help now before it turns into an issue. And they get turned away. Because it's just, oh, the puberty, or oh, hormones, or oh, it's just that time in their life. Then it keeps escalating and you keep going back. And then instead of going to, and I've seen this happen, where instead of going to the mental health facilities that won't help you and the doctors that won't help you, then and behaviors escalate and things get really bad, and then you go to the police department.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you've got a kid who is, and I do hold the parents and the school responsible for what happened this last shooting, because this kid, not only did he draw the pictures of and said, help me, help me, help me, help me.
Yep.
All of you saw it and you fucking sent him back to class.
That was
they literally say, yes, they literally say, call me when something happens. So you're telling me, you have people in these positions where their children are struggling with real, legitimate mental health issues. This isn't a discipline thing. This isn't a personality thing. This is a legitimate mental health issues, whatever they be, bipolar, schizophrenia, depression, whatever it is, that are literally begging for help, going to the police and going, I'm scared.
Mm-hmm.
Going to calling CPS themselves, being at their wits' end and going, I can't do this anymore. And literally calling Child Protective Services themselves and going, hey, I don't know what to do. Help me. And their response to these people is, we can't do anything
until something happens.
I have a direct quote from a CPS worker that I encountered one time. And we were talking about people needing help and how to, and she said to me, I said, what do you do in these situations? If somebody if a child especially is in danger of either hurting themselves or somebody else, like, how do you deal with that? And she and I were talking, and she said, unfortunately, our system is broken. This is her direct quote. Our system is broken, especially for teenage boys. Especially for teenage boys. And that, unfortunately, unless something happens, i.e., they kill somebody, they assault somebody, they hurt themselves, they whatever the situation, then they can step in and do something.
Right.
But then you have parents that are, begging and trying to get help, and they're literally going, whatever. And then you have parents who are doing everything and there's no reason for them to even be involved, and they're taking their kids away. And you go,
yeah,
like, the whole system is flawed. But to have, the desperation, I remember just looking, I didn't actually understand it at the time, but like looking back at the desperation my mom must have had
mm-hmm.
of seeing her child struggling so much and begging for help, and still I'm sure that she goes through this the sadness and the struggle of me still at 36 having to explain to people, to
Mm-hmm.
doctors, to nurses, because it happens all the time. I have family in healthcare,
Mm-hmm.
and I know a lot of where they're just overworked, they're overtired, and they don't
Mm-hmm.
want another patient. The doctors are not listening. The staff is not listening. And listen, I have great respect for our medical staff, and I think they're amazing. And this is not a
Mm-hmm.
knock on nurses this is just a reality of people need to start listening. People's lives are on the line.
Mm-hmm.
Their lives, other people's lives. So my point with the school shooting thing is all of when these parents and these kids are begging for help and going, I need help, and nobody helps, and then the kid goes and shoots up his school. I'm not saying he's not responsible. I'm not saying that it's in any way, shape, or form okay for him to do that
Right.
whatsoever. And I think that if he does survive the situation, he needs to go to prison, or she, or we,
Mm-hmm.
I in no way, shape, or form am I excusing the behavior. But what I'm saying is they're not the only ones responsible.
Everybody had to blame in that situation. It's not just the child. You had the school that was blamed for that situation because you should never sent them back to class, and then you had the parents who bought them the gun.
Yes.
So everybody in this situation has to
And
take
it's
blame.
awful. It's heartbreaking, and I pray for all of them,
But see,
and what this kid must have been going through, because he was crying out for help. He was asking for help, or he wouldn't have drawn those things and left them where his teachers could find them and said the things that he could have said. Like, you know, it's awful, because people just they don't want to listen. They don't want to take the time. It's not important enough because it's not affecting them directly until it
now
affects
see,
them directly.
I'm lucky in the sense that when I have issues, because I'm a veteran, so I go through the VA.
Mm-hmm.
I'm lucky enough to say that, you know, case in point, before I started my road to, recovery and sobriety, I was blowing coke up my nose,
Yeah.
you know, and one night, I don't know what happened. I don't know what triggered it. I really don't know. But it's like I had a mental breakdown and still crying for more cocaine,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I could not stop it, you
Yep.
know, and, like I was staying with my cousin at the time, and my cousin worked at night. So, she was just trying to calm me down and get me to lay my head down and get some sleep. And I guess eventually I must have cried myself to sleep. But then the next day, I made some phone calls, and I and the VA was like, "Come on," And my cousin took me over to the Bronx VA psych ward, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what started it. Started my recovery. Started it. Said woo there yet, but it
Yeah.
started the ball rolling.
Yeah.
To the point where I at least stopped using. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and then you know, and I've been in therapy ever since.
Yeah.
And that was like what, 2010.
Mm-hmm.
2009, 2010, and I've been in therapy ever since because I know what drove me to that. You know,
Well, and I am a firm believer that, and I know there are a lot of people who don't think therapy is worth it, or they think that if it makes you crazy, if you see a therapist. I think everybody on the planet
he's a therapist.
needs therapy. No, seriously, because the talk therapy, especially, just to have somebody. But that's the hard thing, though. I will say, finding somebody you click with that you can, because therapy is also about trust, and that's a big part of why a lot of people, myself included, have had a hard time really finding a therapist to open up to. And that's why when I had Michelle and she was so good, and then it was like, oh, because now I have to rehash all of this stuff so they understand what's going on. But I talk therapy is amazing. Even if, honestly, it's great to have a neutral third party. But
Because you could have epiphanies. How
mm-hmm,
many epiphanies I had sitting down talking with my therapist, and we talking and talking, and then all of a sudden the light bulb go,
they're
oh
like,
wait,
oh,
I didn't, I didn't even know about that. You know,
well, and I think it's really awesome too that like I always say I have like my professional therapist and then I have like my family therapist.
Mhm.
So it's like I have I can call my mom and just word vomit all of it, and
Mhm.
just or I can call you and do the same thing, or my sisters, and I think that's really important too, is to just have, because sometimes you um don't want advice. Sometimes you don't want you just need to get it out. And I
Right.
think most of my therapy, the breakthroughs that I've had, have been me just getting it out. And once I get it out, that's when you have that epiphany of like, huh.
Well, see, and this is why I have issues with some people, because some people like, they so big on doping people on prescription meds that deal with
Yeah.
mental health issues. I said no, but there's a difference though, because when you couple that with therapy, it
Yeah.
works. You know what I'm
Because
saying?
that's the problem too, is they want to put a pill on it and say you're fine.
Exactly.
But they're not, or they either don't take you seriously. And so it's like, all right, here, have a pill. And again, I'm all for taking a medication if you need it, if you genuinely need it. Like my mom, for instance, has had 2 kidney transplants, and she is alive today because of her anti-rejection meds. She has to take a gang load of pills every single day, or she will die. But
Right.
she's able to live. I see it as the same thing with my bipolar medication. Um, because I take Zoloft and also search uh Seroquel, and trazodone occasionally, but um they're all things that genuinely I can't function without. But then I also have an ADD ADHD diagnosis, which I think really has more to do with my bipolar. And for a long time they were trying to put me, throw me on some Ritalin or throw me on some, and I'm like, that's not, I don't. So I think you have to be very careful with medication
Right.
and make sure that you have the correct diagnosis, because if you don't, it can really do a number on you.
Right. And you and I, we spoke last night, and I told you that you know that my therapist is referring me to do equine therapy,
Yes, and I think that
which
is incredible.
I honestly did not even know they had that service. But for those who don't know, equine therapy is where you work with horses. It's good for different aspects of it. Even PTSD, because it teaches you how to bond, it teaches you how to connect, it teaches you
Teaches
how
you
to
how to
love.
trust.
and it teaches you how to trust, you know. And so I'm like, I love horses, you know, so I'm like, let's go, you know. But my PTSD stems from my rape and my sexual assault
Mm-hmm.
on active duty, you know.
Yeah.
And like I told my doctor, you know, like when people have nightmares, especially coming out of that situation, they usually have nightmares of the situation, you know.
Yeah.
But my nightmares, it manifests in another way, you know. And and she made a comment. She said, well, you know, it could be just your mind is trying to protect you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's why it's been done that way.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I think that the equine therapy is going to be really good for you. I'm very excited for you about that. Um I think the best therapy on the planet is animal therapy, regardless of the animal.
Right.
I really do, because for me, especially, see, because I'm a pit bull mom, because they're big
Right.
and scary and terrifying and
Oh,
cuddly
they
and
big.
stupid
Oh,
and derpy and ridiculous. And and I have other breeds too, but for me, just spending time with any of the animals. I had horses when I was a kid. I had all kinds of different pigs and different kinds of things. And to me, going through the mental health issues that I was going through and not really being medicated or doing, the getting the help that I needed, my therapy was always in an animal. Always. They're
okay. I have to tell a story. I have to tell a story, y'all. And this
I
is
know
like,
which one. I know which one she's gonna.
it's
I know it is.
funny as
My
hell.
quad dog. My quad dog.
Yes.
He's such a. I knew it.
Okay. Well, when I first met Quad, there's a couple of stories. But the first time I met Quad Dog, which was her baby,
That
you
was my
know,
canine soulmate. He passed away a few years ago, but yeah.
she brought him to the house. First thing he did was piddle on the floor. I said, Candace, you
And
don't
he never
piddle.
did. And you know what? He never did that. Like he was, even though he was a rescue and he was in really bad shape when we got him. But he was never I'm gonna pee in the house unless he got really, really excited. Then he would piddle like
Mm-hmm.
he did at your house, or if he was really mad about something.
Right. Well, me and Quad Dog, we've been friends, since that moment. We bonded over his piddling on my
He
floor.
sure did. He got so excited, and then he just looked up at you and like peed a little bit, and then just kind of went,
I like,
"But I love you."
you did. I know you didn't just piddle on my floor. But that was one of them. But the other one was the last time, I think was 2015 when I came out to visit.
Hmm.
The dog thought he was a lap dog.
Oh,
You could
for
not
sure.
see me at all. All you saw
Mm-mm.
was my legs. This dog literally climbed up in my lap like he was a lap dog, and just like, I'm
Oh,
like, really?
yeah. Yes, he was almost 80 pounds, and he thought he was 8 pounds. And he was an old man when he passed. He was 14, but I had him for I had almost 13 years.
Mhm.
Um, but no, yeah, he had no concept. But like,
But this one
Qua
really did.
really did not have yeah, no, he didn't understand that he was a big dog. He just was
I'm
like, I
sitting.
don't. He actually, I don't think. I don't think he knew he was a dog.
He didn't act like he thought he was.
I think he just thought he was a human with a lot of fur and a tail. Like I don't.
Cause I'm like, cause we sitting in the living room, and I'm sitting in the corner of the couch, minding my business. And I'm looking at Quan. Quan's got these pretty puppy dog eyes, and he's like, I'm coming up there. I was like,
He
oh
sure
yeah.
did.
And he got up there, and he said, "I'm going to get all up in your lap." And I'm like,
Yes.
damn.
Well, and he was really genuinely the best therapist I've ever had.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, and I am that girl that talks to my animals like I talk to humans.
Right.
And my husband, sometimes he'll laugh at me and he's like, "Babe, they don't understand." I'm like, "Yes, they do. They do. They understand every word." And even if they don't, animals don't judge you.
No.
Although they can find a creeper 1,000 miles. See, I've always said, I don't trust people who don't like, or I don't trust people who don't like my dogs. Like,
Right.
I understand a fear of dogs in general, but people who don't like dogs, and I don't, and I trust my dog when they don't like a person. Especially Qua. Because Qua loved everybody. Everybody. Didn't matter how big or small or black or white or purple or he didn't care. He did not care. He loved everybody. So when he didn't like you, I didn't like you. You know what I mean? Because I'll never forget. And he was he was the best pit bull ever. I swear. He was the best dog ever. I will never forget. I was living in Linwood, this apartment, and we had 3 maintenance guys that lived. 2 of them lived with their families, with their wives and kids in our building. And then there was one dude that lived by himself, like in the maintenance building or whatever. And Qua loved the guys that lived in our building. They every time they saw him, he would give them loves and they would give him a treat. And from the moment he very first came in contact with the other dude, he was like, the hair would go up on the back of his neck and he'd dig his feet, he'd get that protective stance. And so the guy always made me feel very uncomfortable anyway. And so one day I was home alone and we were doing something in the kitchen and the guy, the creepy guy, knocked on my door. And he goes, "Oh, I'm here to fix whatever it was." I don't remember. And I just did not feel comfortable. They didn't give me notice that they were coming in to fix it. And I didn't feel comfortable with him being like in my home with nobody else there. Like I just, and so I was like, "Now's not a good time. I need you to come back later." And Qua wasn't, he was standing behind me and I had the door kind of like cracked open and he was standing behind me and he was like, not being aggressive, but definitely had that
on alert.
He was like on alert. And I said, "You need to come back." He goes, "I need to do it now." I said, "You guys didn't give me time and now's not a good time." And I go to shut the door and the guy puts his foot in the door and he pushed the door open. And I don't know if he didn't realize Qua was standing behind me or he didn't care. And now I'm 5 feet tall, so I'm not that tall, but from a dead jump, that dog from a standstill, that dog jumped over me and tackled the dude, hand to God, tackled the dude and he didn't bite him. He just held him like this, had him with his mouth. And the dude peed himself. And the neighbor who had just moved in and everybody knew Qua. Everybody loved Qua. Everybody knew he was my emotional support animal. He was, but there was a neighbor that moved in just like a couple days before that. I don't even think we'd met yet. And she happened to be coming home when he pushed his foot, like unlocking her door, and saw him like try to force his way into the house. So he ran down to the office and her dog attacked me and and the neighbor went in and was like, came down with me and she was like, that's not what happened. So And I always, I had a very hard time when he passed. I still have, it's been almost 3 years or 2.5 years, and I still cry. I still miss him every day because he really, Jenny, he was my protector. He went with me everywhere. He was my protector. He was my confidant. I would have a nightmare and he would wake me up with kisses. He always knew if I had a seizure, he would take care of me. He knew he just understood my cues and what I needed. And I think that's why I connect with animals more than humans. So that's a thing too. If you don't feel comfortable, because not everybody's comfortable sitting down with a person one-on-one and going, here are my issues. And that's the other thing that I would like to say. People. Now this is a double-edged, because I'm going to talk to both sides for a minute. Emotional support animals are 100% a real thing. Yes. Regardless of species. It could be a snake, it could be a dog, it could be a bird, it doesn't 100% any kind of animal, a horse, emotional support. Absolutely 100%. With that said, people need to stop trying to register their animals as emotional support animals just so they can have them in their apartments and shit. Because what happens is your untrained asshole animal, and really you're the asshole because your animal's just doing what animals do, are the reason that it's so difficult for people to understand what a real emotional support animal is.
Exactly. And not only that, but it also gives it, it gives the actual emotional support animal a bad rep.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And the same thing with a service animal. Service animal, you got people out here faking the funk, and it makes it bad for the actual service animals because you're trying to pass your dog off as a service animal, which he's clearly not, as you can see, because most service animals are calm and they're subdued.
Yeah.
Unless you get into their owner's space, you might have an issue.
Right.
But for the most part, any service animal I've seen has always been calm, subdued, on alert, for protecting their owner. Meanwhile, you got these people faking the funk where the dog is running all over the place trying to jump on it. That is not a service animal.
I get so frustrated, with that. But, and I also, there's something to be said, especially, like I do a lot of work with rescue animals, as you know, and that's a really good therapy too. Because, like Qua was a rescue, and I think we rescued each other. We taught each other how to trust. We taught each other how to survive. We taught each other how to, that it's okay, and had that bond. And I think that's probably why I did bond with him as much as I did, because I was in one of the darkest places I've ever been in my entire life when I found him. And we saved each other. So I'm very excited for you to do this equine therapy. I think it'll be really good for you. And I think, you're going to learn a lot about yourself too. Plus, you'll probably get some abs from writing, because when you're writing, you like, I'm just saying.
We're not talking about the butthole because the butthole is on straight right now.
I wasn't even talking about that. I'm just saying, you might get some abs because you know how you gotta.
Yeah,
it's like all in your core. I'm just saying it would be good. You could have some like.
My butthead said, "Go ahead, put your ass on a horse and see what happens. See what I do to you. See what I do to you. You think getting a finger stuck up in your hole is going to be bad enough. Put
Oh
me
my God.
on a saddle, and we are going to have an issue. You know? I'm sorry, y'all. This is my baby sis, and we do this every time we get together.
This is just, yeah.
This is our thing, you know. Like I said, I saw something.
I mean, we don't just talk about buttholes, but like,
just saying. Just like I said, I'm gonna create a T-shirt because I found this one emblem that says the both of us together are crazy. Who knew? And I was like, exactly. Who knew? You know. And mind you, her birthday is 3 days after mine. Mine's is July 24th. Hers is July 27th. We both Leos.
Leos, which is a little bit,
right? You know, but, you know, getting back on subject, you know, we're going to do a closing thing, and then hopefully we can get you back on and we'll do some more conversation.
Yeah, I would love to.
You know, the thing is that, listen, all jokes aside, mental health is a very serious issue.
Yes, it is.
People don't want to talk about it. People don't even want to acknowledge it. But you know what? The ironic part about it is that since the pandemic happened, now people start to notice, because now you can't go out. You can't hang with your friends. You can't do any of the stuff you used to do.
And it's harder to put your head in the sand. It's harder to put your head in the sand and pretend that it doesn't exist when it's in your face. Like I said, people don't care until it affects them.
Exactly. And why do we have to get to that point? Why do you have to care, not care until it knocks on your front door? You know,
I just want people to listen. You know, listen and speak up. You know, for those of you who are struggling with mental health issues, speak up. You know, because and even if this one doesn't want to listen, go to the next one. Don't give up. Keep trying, because somebody's going to listen somewhere. You know, and I know it's hard. I know it sucks. I know that it makes you feel like shit. But I promise somebody will do something. You have to be persistent. And on the other side of that, y'all need to listen. Listen. And not just listen, but watch people. Learn people's patterns. Understand, you know, be more empathetic. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, be more sympathetic. Understand that a lot of these issues are not if somebody is saying to you, I need help, listen.
Yeah.
That's it.
And then the support system, you know, because you mentioned that in the beginning, the support system is so important.
Absolutely.
You know, because when your session with your therapy is over, you know, and you know that the next time that you won't see him for another week or two, you know, you need something to fill in that gap. You know, so if you going through something from your last session, between your last session and the next session, you have to have something to fill in your gap. And that's where the support system comes in, because then you can, like me and her do it all the time. You know, I'm going through things, you know, hey, I'm going crazy. Hey,
girl, I need you.
Hey, hello. This thing is this thing on? You know, and we do it to each other all the time. But she's part of my support system, you know.
And she's part of my support system.
And we can call each other like midnight. And mind you, she's 3 hours behind me. So she can call me at midnight and I'll be like, somebody better be dead or dying. But I know when she does that, it's something important, and I
Absolutely.
know you're going through something.
And she could do the same for me, it's, and mind you, we went through a period of, and it wasn't very long, it was only a few years, but we went through a period where we were both on dealing with our own things, where we didn't actually have contact for a few years. And then
I found you through MySpace.
Yeah, and then I was like, oh my god, because I've been looking for and searching because I really was like, I miss her, and because it wasn't back in the day, and I had moved from Washington, so back in the day, it wasn't like you could just be like, hold on, let me find her on Insta. I mean, it was hard enough, especially with MySpace, where people didn't use their like real name most of the time.
Right.
You're one of the most important people in my life, and I'm so very blessed that God brought you into my life.
He did it for a reason. He did it for a reason. Just like he brought Qua into my life for a reason. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Both of y'all my support systems, even though God rest your soul, Qua, I still miss you. I think about you all the time. And I think about the scary, pity, slobbery kisses.
Terrifying. He was so terrifying.
And the kisses is like, oh
my God.
All right, sweetie.
Thank you for having me on your show. Hopefully we can do this again soon.
Yes, we're going to have to schedule another one.
Absolutely.
I love you.
I love you too.
And until next time, have a good day.
You too.